Hello and welcome to the Conversation in Commentary. Today we'll be looking at the different points as to whether the UK should be staying within the EU or not. I'm Ieuan Thomas and sitting with me is Ellen Smith and Kevin Boateng. Kevin, I understand that you want to stay in the EU and Ellen, you want to leave. So Kevin, what makes you want to stay within the EU?
Well, hey guys, I've got my feelings that just leaving the EU would just be a huge downgrade to the economy that we live in right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like, for example, millions of jobs will be taken away if we leave the EU, and that's just crazy. We can't be taking away jobs where we're even scrambling for jobs right now. And I truly believe that Ellen's, what can I call it? Ellen's stubbornness to leave the EU is very, very patronising.
Yeah, it was whilst Nick Clegg was actually Deputy Prime Minister, he cited the figure that as back as in 2000, 3 million jobs relied directly on the membership with the EU. So what would you say about the potential job losses that could occur?
Okay, so I'm about to sound like every politician, but we'd have border control. Think of how many jobs are taken by illegal immigrants, or illegal immigrants accepting less money than like migrants who pay to be here and pay their like insurance. So once they all leave, because they will, if they're here illegally and we get control of our borders, they will be sent back home. Then think of all them jobs that are about to open up.
Yeah, but millions of those jobs are from the EU counters. So if we do take away that EU link, we're gonna get less jobs anyway. So I don't really see the point in that, to be honest.
Yeah, but more jobs will be opening up as we have less. And not all companies have said they'll be leaving the EU. If we leave the EU, they will leave the UK. Not every company has said that. These are estimated figures because no one knows what is going to happen if we decide to leave or stay in the EU.
What we do know is that it's going to be a downgrade. That's what we definitely do.
Well, not necessarily, because leaving the EU opens us up to having stronger trading memberships with other countries.
Yeah, but I remember Barack Obama saying that their ties with us would be...
Okay, they don't have a say because they're about to vote in Donald Trump. But, so technically, Donald Trump would be the one to make the free trading with us because Barack Obama's coming to the end of his...
But he still has the power to leave some...
Yeah, but it wouldn't be his choice, it'd be Donald Trump's.
Anyway, that's anywhere in the future, and that's mainly based on America. But I've noticed that you've picked up on the trade, and with more than 50% of our exports going to EU countries, with our membership allows us to have a say on the trading rules that are brought up at these meetings. Is the trade worth losing out on, especially with countries such as Germany and France with such big exploitations, with them being on our side within the EU? Would that help, or do you think it's better leaving it?
But there's no guarantee we would lose them trades. I mean, if David Cameron himself has said he's been working and negotiating deals with other countries, no matter what happens. Just because we're leaving the EU doesn't necessarily... We'll have things they want, they'll have things we want, so we can come to a free trade agreement.
So what would you have to say on that, Kev?
I wouldn't co-sign that, to be honest. I wouldn't. I just feel like leaving the EU when it's been a big part of the United Kingdom for how many years, probably like everything probably came together since the World War. So leaving the EU now will just cause too much controversy. It's just going to be too confusing, and it won't benefit everybody the way people are saying it would.
But we didn't join the EU, okay? We joined the European Economic Community in 1975. Then 20 years later it changed its name to the EU, and with came the new name became new rules and powers that they held that wasn't initially agreed to, making new laws. They can overrule any law our court brings in.
So what would you say is the disadvantage of living in life now? Because everybody's still going through problems.
£8.5 billion a year is going to the EU when we can be putting that back into the NHS. illegal immigrants are using our resources that we need, and we can be putting that back into local businesses. The NHS.
But it's
think
not
of
like
how
it's
much
not like we're paying for something
in 8 years.
that gives us no return. We still have a return from what we're paying for. When you buy something, you're expected to get a return.
Yeah, and we get paid back in like.
I'm not talking about paid. You get paid back in exports. You get paid back in crime laws and everything else. So there is benefits to being in the EU.
Yeah, but
No. Sticking to, let's not make this too much of an argument, sticking to obviously the law procedure and the crime. Obviously there's an act called the European Arrest Warrant, which makes legal procedures easier whilst Great Britain citizens can visit the EU and vice versa. But obviously if we was to leave the EU, would it make it slightly harder for obviously crimes in Europe, making it more complicated? And this will disallow criminals to be brought to justice within the EU. Do you think this European arrest warrant is going to play a big part in whether Great Britain stays within the EU or whether it doesn't?
What if somebody commits a crime in Europe and comes to the UK and
well, they're already doing that.
comes to the UK?
That's what it means. It means that if they commit a crime in another European country, I mean, there's 28 countries in the EU, and they commit the crime and they come to the UK, most likely they'll get put in our prison system. Whereas if we weren't a part of the EU, they'd be extradited, and that's more money we're saving than putting it into the jail system.
I wouldn't. I don't believe that.
You disagree?
There's pros and cons for this, but there's more cons than pros, if you know what I mean.
You believe that, yeah. So obviously with you've said to saving money as well. I'm just trying to link questions into this now. So obviously the EU supposedly charges £55 million per day to be part of. That's a lot of money that Great Britain could be saving and not spending so much whilst being in that. Would you rather save the 50 million daily, or would you rather spend it to keep in the... Is the EU worth £50 million a day?
I personally can't answer that question because someone said, one news outlet said we pay 20 billion a year into the EU, but another news outlet has said, it works out at 8.5 billion pound a year. But the one thing that David Cameron has never done is never gave us a figure. It's an undisclosed figure on how much the EU gives us. So you can't make an appropriate argument without all the facts.
Name me a country that's come out of the EU and been successful.
I actually have some research here. I noticed this eearlier.
Norway?
Norway, you're correct actually, is successfully left the EU and still manages to trade. But do you believe that...
What's the disadvantages of Norway right now? I'm pretty sure they're going through something right now.
I've just simply got that Norway
Boris
successfully
Johnson
left the EU.
has said, are we going to become the next Norway or the next Canada? Well, what I would like to ask you, Boris Johnson, is give us more detail. We can't fight yes or no on things that we're only given half facts of. I refuse to.
So what's the full facts of Canada? I'd like to know. Do you know a little bit?
He mentioned it in passing in a public speech and said, are we going to become the next Norway? And then left it at that. Wow, I'm not going to sit here and drop myself in it when I don't know all the facts. Sly one.
That's what I'm saying. Is not everybody knows the true facts of what is going on, and I feel like maybe we need more education. Maybe we need more of a tuition as to what the EU can do for us and what being out the EU could not do for us.
This is what I was speaking to the other day. I was speaking to a close friend, and we were saying that even at the age of 20 years old, I still don't know what I probably should know about politics, and I do feel that that should be put towards the education system. But that's another time. That's another to talk into. But if I was to end this podcast now, and if I was to just lay one question on the line for both of you to answer, it would be that simply, would Great Britain seem as powerful if it was to leave the EU regarding the rest of the world? May it disallow Britain to take part in some world trade, some development projects and other things? So is Great Britain as powerful with the EU or without?
What people need to recognise is Great Britain's not as powerful as they were 50 years ago. Great Britain has lost the efficiency they once had. And I believe that Great Britain needs help. They can't do everything by themselves. And the EU is there to provide help, is there to equally share help amongst all European countries. And I feel like we've been going for how many years? What's the point changing?
Ellen?
Brussels makes more than half of our laws, okay, from everything. From the laws you get on kids' packets all the way to death penalties. Now, is that fair? Shouldn't we have a right to say how we sentence our own criminals? And it shouldn't be our problem. If the countries decide we're not allowed to sign a free trade in, well, Mr. David Cameron, we call you to do something. We elected you as Prime Minister of us because you promised to hold this vote and you promised to help build something greater than Great Britain. Well, we call you now to take your stand and to actually do that. We should be worried about what's going to happen next generation. Instead of screwing us, help us.
So you believe that staying with the EU would honestly be bad for Great Britain?
Well, as I stand now, I do. However, the book he released, well, that was propaganda. No one's given us a straight answer. No one has told us 100% unbiased of both sides. So how does he expect us to vote? For all I know, I could have read everything that's biased, and so could he. We could be on completely separate sides, or we could be on the same side and not know it. So we call.
I can agree with that statement. I guess she brought a good point. Finally, like
we'll bring that to an end, folks. I want to thank you for coming in today and talking to us. We had Ellen Smith and Kevin Boateng.
Thank you for having
I'm Ieuan Thomas again, and this is the Conversation and Commentary. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Blah, blah.
Now I'd like to welcome Kinga Fordor for coming in and speaking to us.
It's nice to see you in the studio.
So
I'm glad to be here.
the reason I've brought you in today, Kinga, is so I can have a fair example. I want these two people to fire questions at you. You being from inside the EU anyway, we want to see your opinions on each of the questions they have. So if you two would just like to go ahead and take the mic.
Okay, I'll ask the first question. Just to give everybody the background knowledge of where you're from and stuff like that. Like, do you want to explain to people?
Yeah, so I'm an EU student coming to the UK from Hungary to study journalism. So obviously this is quite a pressing matter for me.
Okay, so how do you feel Great Britain leaving the EU would affect you as a student?
Well, obviously, as an EU student, you don't get the student maintenance loan that all the UK students get, but you still get a little bit of help with the tuition fee loan. And I think paying £9,000 without that tuition fee loan would make everything so much harder for students coming outside of the UK. It would put us in the position of international students, which would make it pretty much impossible for some of us to come here and actually get an education here.
But isn't the first question be why are student finances getting so high? Shouldn't the second question be, isn't that like we'd have to do the same if we went to your country? So should it be a two-way street? And the third question is, is that fair? We're from UK, we're studying at home. Are we entitled to more? Whereas if we went to Hungary, you'd be entitled to more than we would going to your local universities. Isn't that just life, not really an EU matter?
But you already are entitled to more here in the UK as a UK student, because you're entitled to get the maintenance loan, which helps with your living. And as an EU student, I'm only allowed to get the tuition fee loan, which is the £9,000, which already is a lot of money.
Yeah, but if we went to Hungary, we'd still have to pay £9,000,
No,
and we
wouldn't.
wouldn't be entitled to pay to more money than you'd be here.
No, you wouldn't, because university fees are different in Hungary. There are free courses as well, depending on whether you have good grades. So we have good students coming from outside of Hungary and having a free education because their grades are that good.
So would you say you don't believe that if Great Britain does leave the EU, there won't be any requirements or suitabilities that, let's say, suit your preferences?
I think it would be made a lot harder. Like, I don't know if you are aware of the international students like situation, how they are not entitled to the tuition fee loan either, so they have to pay all the tuition fees on their own as well. They are not allowed to get a loan, so that obviously.
And plus, accommodation has to be paid all up front, right?
Yeah.
So.
Whereas
doesn't
as
that
an EU
bring-
student, I can just pay like monthly, which is obviously a lot easier than paying it all up front without getting the student finance.
So doesn't that bring me back to my first point? Aren't we fighting the wrong people? Instead of fighting each other, shouldn't we be fighting? I'm putting this inverted commas, the man. Why are we paying £9,000 a year? Shouldn't that be the honest question? Like, shouldn't we be going into more detail about why money is set out a certain way? You know, overheads. Why do international students have to pay up front? Why don't EU students have to pay up front? Because at the end of the day, everyone has to pay the £9,000 a year. So unless their course is a different price, but you know, that should be that's.
Yes, but there's a lot of difference between having to pay that £9,000 up front while you're still a student and having to put your family in debt, or getting it as a student loan and then paying it back once you actually have a job and you're an earning.
But that's my
proper
point.
adult.
Aren't we fighting the wrong people?
Well, we might be, but
Rather than discussing it with each other, shouldn't we bring it up to again, I'm using inverted commas wisely, the higher power.
So, Kinga, from your perspective, obviously you're just a student from the EU. Do you feel you should pay? Because obviously I'm from Wales, and obviously I pay a different amount to England. Even though we're in Great Britain, we still pay separate amounts. Do you feel you should pay the wage from back home and study here, or do you think you should pay the wage that we all pay here? Or
well, I think it's quite fair to pay the same amount as all the other students.
yeah,
The mic is gone.
no, you're in, you can.
That all the other students pay here, whether they are UK or EU or anything, but it would be nice to get the same kind of help that all the other students can get.
I would
Because
say,
at the end of the day, we're not asking for a maintenance grant or anything. We're asking for a loan that
personally,
you pay back.
I wouldn't see that as a downfall, to be honest. I feel like every country is a country because it has its perks, and if you're from a certain country, there must be certain perks
But with
suited
every
to you.
perk comes the negative side. Every country is a country because of its perks and downfalls. If you want the perks, you must accept the downfalls, no matter how bizarre, small, insignificant, or how massive they are.
And that's why I feel like leaving the EU would be irrelevant.
Well, why would it be irrelevant? Because we're still a country.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even if we leave the EU, we're still going to have the perks and the downfalls, but we'd have more control over our law system. We'd have more control over the money and where it goes. British values will still be put in place. It's not to penalise anyone. It's not there to make anyone feel unwelcome. It's to make people go through the proper channels, such as Pella. Pella would have gone through the proper channels to become a student at in this country. Yes? No?
Well,
So-
if I would have had to pay £9,000 up front and would have had to pay all my accommodation fees and everything up front, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because that is just such a huge amount of money, especially if you take it into consideration how in different countries the wages are lower than here in the UK. So yeah, I probably wouldn't have come to university here.
But if we do leave the EU, the wages will go even higher. They've said that. They've said because they'll be going more money back into our own personal system, rather than having to bail out other EU countries, we should be able to give money back to big and small businesses. But
It's a hard argument.
But there is, again, call for David Cameron. I mean, students bring in so much money of this economy. We ourselves are bringing in there's over 90 grand coming in a year just from half of our class, half of one course. So shouldn't there be for him to call to release a press statement about students? Should he be making it easier for international students, especially if he wants us to leave or stay? Again, this is bringing us back to the bias, because he has been said that he's got one side of the story and he wants to stick to it. So what's going
Yes,
to
but if you think about it, don't you think that if you think about it, European students bring in a lot of money because you get the tuition fee loan, so you don't pay that, but at the same time you're paying all the accommodation fees, all the food that you're buying yourself, and all the other things that you buy. You don't buy it from your maintenance loan that all the UK students are buying it from. You're buying it from your own money as an EU student. So that's good for the
But
economy.
if you weren't a part of the EU, but you still had the same opportunities we did, £9 after you had the course, you know, you paid your rent monthly, you'd still want to come. You've chose the university not because of the money it gives you, but because you liked the university.
No, but like the £9,000 tuition fee loan and all the other things are available to me because I'm an EU student, because I'm not an international student from China or America. It's because we're part of the EU, and that gives you a certain kind of protection and a certain kind of agreement between these countries to help each other.
I think what we must remember is that we do have friends, friends from other countries, and us leaving the EU would hurt other countries too, and we can't only just think about ourselves.
Yeah, but don't we always think of other people? I mean, look how many times we've had to bail Greece out.
We can't. It's like how many times you have to bail out your brother
Until the point where he needs to get his own help.
until he gets his own help, and you still need to bail him out.
Well, then you need to get him better help, really, at the end of the day. Isn't
Okay,
it?
okay. Like we've said at the beginning of the point, that it's very pros and there's very cons. There's two sides to it. But it was nice to see a EU, not only journalist but student as well, give her information and her opinion on it. So I just want to thank you, Kinga, for coming in.
Thanks
Thank you for spending time, and thank you for answering our questions.